Good day, teachers. The purpose of this video is to provide you with a reminder and a review of two techniques for the classroom management, which are called CCQ and ICQ. Following, I'm going to share with you a few pointers with a PowerPoint presentation, and I hope that this video provides you with some sort of clarity and ideas to implement and make your classroom experience much better. Here we go. CCQ and ICQ as techniques in the classroom will be explained through these four key points. First, the concepts, what they stand for. Second, the functions and the processes that happen in them both. Third, a few examples. And finally, of course, a few bad examples and a recommended practice based on those four examples of ICQ and CCQ. CCQ stands for concept checking questions. Concepts happen throughout the entire learning experience process, whether you have a very, very basic concept in science as, for example, how the blood system works or the respiratory system works, or in social studies, for example, the concept of revolutions, or the concept of civilization, where it comes from, how a child in 5th grade can understand the concept of civilization and a student of 7th grade or 8th grade can understand the same concept, and how they are broadly more progressively complex when it comes on one grade or the other. ICQ, on the other hand, stands for instruction checking question. And this means that we are not in classrooms where you are the sole source of the information, and they need to go ahead and process different kinds of objects, information, documents and files, and simply materials that are prepared by you. And in order to do that efficiently and with a degree of satisfaction for their own learning experience, it's important to be able to come up with clear, to the point instructions that allow them clarity on what they're expected to do. And finally, why both practices in a classroom and how they both contribute and complement each other. Since you can read, I allow you for some pointers to just see through the text, but we're going to start with CCQ. And we start with CCQ because whenever a learning experience happens, is basically them learning new things, new understandings of the world from different perspectives, from different aspects that come to life whenever they're in different subjects. So it is important indeed to learn how to review whether the students or not are following you, if this explanation that you gave, it's clear enough, or to understand the degree of profundity or depth by which they are understanding the concepts that you're coming up with in the class. The why has to do with all of the questions that are presented here. And it has to do with understanding that we need to know not only the depth, but how much they are following us throughout the entire process, even from the beginning. What we don't want certainly is to wait until the first test or the first quiz to realize, oh my gosh, they're lost. That is why we need to come up with CCQ questions constantly throughout the process, especially in the very beginning. Every time you start a new concept, if you're a subject, for example, literature or social studies or science, or even some concepts that we work throughout in language, it is important. Actually, this works for every single subject. It doesn't matter if it's in English or not, all right? When does it become necessary? I just mentioned at the very beginning, when we start any kind of process is rather relevant to understand, to make sure that they understand the basic tenets, the principles, how things work, etc. And then in every lesson, if you are working throughout a particular aspect of a particular concept, is good, it's important, it's necessary for you to know if by the end of that lesson, they got it, on how far they got it, or if there needs to be something tweaked, improved, modified, so that we can adjust the content or the practices or the approach so that they actually get it. How much? That's the thing. Once you start reviewing with concept checking questions throughout your process, then you will see how much, how often the students need to check, and the students need to be checked. These attempts at two things. Number one, of course, the concept itself, the content itself, but number two, also the degree of attention. This is one of those techniques that allow you to not just control them because of the sake of control. I'm a control freak, I need my CCQs. No, more than anything is because it allows you to be helpful, to be a source of not just information, but understanding and reshaping or reshaping and giving it a new perspective so that students can more easily follow you or follow what you want them to achieve. What kind of evidence can you provide of their understanding? It depends on your questions. Now, we can have physical questions, oral questions, informal and formal questions, quizzes, exams, etc., which are like the further ahead kind of process. But to give you a simple example, CCQ in a literature class would be something around the lines of mention what is the difference between a metaphor and a simile in a poem, and how can you recognize one or the other? That would be a good CCQ, because in this case you're not asking them, okay, define for me metaphor, define for me simile. No, what you're doing is actually giving them the room to make evident the clear characteristics of one and the other, to be able to recognize the patterns and the differences between one and the other. And in turn, through that, hopefully, they might come up with a good adjusted definition for their own degree of understanding. And maybe if you see that there is no difference for them in their heads what a metaphor and what a simile is, then probably you can point at them what happens when the metaphor doesn't have the word as or the word like. And then that is the difference. It's a grammatical difference. It's a semantic difference. How or what makes a good CCQ? Again, it will depend on the context. If you're in the early stages, oral questions in the end of specific moments, every now and then, will help you gather things. I would argue against using it as an element of punishment. And by that, I mean, yes, we always have distracted kids, but asking a complex question to a student that is clearly not paying attention is not a good idea. But perhaps you can use one idea if you're working, for example, as I was pointing out in literature, figures of speech. You're going to say, okay, this line is going to work on a few examples of metaphors. This line is going to work on a few examples of similes. This line is going to work on a few examples of aphorisms. And this line is going to work on a few examples of blah. And then check with the examples, okay, what works with this example? And in turn, what then characterizes a metaphor? What then characterizes an aphorism? What then characterizes this and that? And those are CCQ questions that are worth having orally in a classroom, especially if you're not just asking one student. If you try to involve a larger group, not necessarily those that are completely lost or those that are completely in the game. Try to keep it varied, always try to run the participation throughout the entire classroom so that you always collect their attention, so that you always bring them back to you, and so that you always have them in the game. How to gauge their degree of understanding is part of the main function and purpose of CCQs. And following, we're going to see a few examples. Examples of CCQ. What are the basic conditions that make a civilization? According to what I read a few moments ago, it's 5. And so you give them, okay, give me 5. Provide them with parameters, something that they can, like a range in which they can move back and forth, and somehow give them a pointer of if there are mistakes in their understanding of the thing. I mean, oh, boo, I just knew 2 of them. So well, how many do we need to know? And oh, which ones am I missing? And then of course make sure that they are taking notes. So in this case, we have specialized labor, easy access to water, agricultural development, clear social layers, and God knows what else. But certainly when you are so specific, what are the basic conditions that make a civilization? And they start saying, like the pyramids and go around in the images that they have in their head, it doesn't allow them to conceptualize. So if you know, and you have explained, or you have put them through a source that tells them that there are 5 clear conditions that make a civilization in the ancient times anyways, then make sure that you give them the parameters to know how many, which might be them, where they can find the information, remember more than the remember what or whatever. From these 2 examples, identify the metaphor, the depth of your eyes. Your eyes are deep as blue pools. As I pointed out the example before, the metaphor thingy. So what characterizes a metaphor is another CCQ question that is different from the previous one, because in the previous one, you are giving them examples and you are having them identify which is what, which is which. If you remember, a metaphor is a comparison using attributes of something else that is not necessarily related to that something that you're comparing it with, without the use of the words as and like. Your eyes are as deep as blue pools. There you have a clear simile, because it's using the structure of comparisons, as and like. So what characterizes a metaphor? And then it could be your definition, the definition of the kids, a comparison with attributes of something else, that blah, blah, comparison that doesn't use as or like. And then, of course, it will depend on the level of your students, whether they're in 5th grade or they're in 11th grade. There is that. Another example of CCQ mentioned 3 processes that take place in the respiratory system in a body. Whatever. I mean, you know, I'm not a science teacher, but there is that. What is the function of whatever in the blood stream? But it's very specific. Give me 3 features of a good thesis statement. If you see I'm using clear numbers, if they narrow it down to things that they can pinpoint with their finger, with the fingers of one hand, they might try to recall it easier. And they might use it later on as mnemonics, which means that they might be able to remember, okay, if the exam, the question of the civilization, I have to have my hand, okay, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And then, yeah, they forgot number 5, but it's okay, at least they go 4. So I'm being very specific with the question. What I do not ask here, if you pay attention, is yes, no questions. Those are really not functional examples of CCQ. Do you remember the conditions that make a civilization? Yeah, yes, no, but you don't know to what degree they understand the concept of civilization or the concept of metaphor, etc. And you have a vague notion that the usual suspects actually get you, and the others are kind of in the middle, and the others completely lost. So that is absolutely important to take into consideration here. No, yes, no question. No is simple, like, do you remember this or that? Because of course they're going to say yes or no, or It's important to be very specific about your questions. I think that these are good examples, and I hope that the concept of CCQ is rather clear for you at this point. I'm going to move on to ICQ. And in ICQ, as I mentioned before, is instruction checking questions, which means that I hope not. This is not a romantic thing. This is very practical, and ICQs are very practical in nature. What we hope to do with ICQs is to rather form habits of attention in students that allow them to, by the end of an instruction, know for reals, know for sure what you expect them to do. Why is it important to use them? It is no news for any of us that every time you say, we're going to do this, this, and that, they are going to end up asking, so teacher, what do we have to do? Even if they don't ask you, they ask somebody else. So it's like, number 1, some of them might not pay attention. Number 2, some of us might be very, very worthy and might make instructions such a huge thing that by the end of the first 3 words, I already lost their attention. So why is it important to use them? First, is a trainer for us. A trainer for us to be absolutely concrete, clear, and simple in the way that we provide instructions to students, so that it's easy for them to remember and to understand the step-by-step and the progressively more complex structure of the exercise, not the exercise, the task that I want them to develop throughout the lesson. Why are ICQs important for me as a teacher? Because in my language lessons, what I want, and yes, it is a hope as a director of this program, is for you to not spend more than, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes in any kind of explanation. And then the rest of the time, say 25 minutes in the middle, and then some more 5 or minutes later on, is for them to develop work, for them to ask questions, for them to answer those questions, to inquire, to look for answers, to organize their ideas, and to share with you. And then, of course, you are there in the middle of everything, trying to steer them to the right path, to the right concept, to the right idea, or to the right understanding of what they are expected to do. Some tasks are very simple. Complete this map using 3 colors with this and that. Others are more complex because they become a larger task, for example, in a project. So it is important for them. It is important for you to make it clear, concise, and concrete, simple. It is important for them to become used to understanding how instructions work. We do things following instructions throughout our entire lives. It never stops. It's just a good habit to understand instructions. It provides them with a sense of autonomy and accomplishment once they have done things on their own. But it's something that they can accomplish better if we learn how to make good instructions. Now, what are ICQs? ICQs can be the following types: about instructions with clear steps, which means that it's like write an essay. That's not an instruction, that is just a task. The instruction has to be divided into steps. So in order to make an essay that we're going to work through within a week, probably, in the first day, I'm going to explain to them how to make a thesis statement. In the second day, I'm going to explain to them the characteristics and the parts of, say, the introduction that has 4 types of sentences. In the next lesson, I'm going to explain to them how to develop the body of the essay according to the type of essay, comparative, argumentative, whatever if. And finally, I'm going to explain to them in the last lesson how to make a conclusion. Why am I dividing in so many chunks? Because what I expect to make is a brief a brief explanation, as in the concept checking part. And I expect them to develop that throughout the rest of the lesson in the task part. And in that sense, the instruction happens. So my instruction the first day will be develop 3 thesis statements based on the explanation that you just heard, and make it so based on the topic of shoes, whatever. In the case of 11th grade, we're working with megacities, life quality in the megacities. And you have to make 3 different thesis statements. One is going to be a question, another is going to be comparison, and another is going to be pros and cons kind of thesis statement. Of course, I suppose that in the 10 minutes of the beginning, I have given them examples, etc. Second aspect of the ICQ, time allotted for the task. My instruction needs to not only include the steps that I'm taking, but also the time that I'm giving them to develop the thing, so that in a particular moment of the task, I'm going to stop here because they know how much time I gave them, and I'm going to be starting asking questions. Pancho, dear, sweetie, Gomez, whatever, what is your thesis statement? Read it aloud. Thank you. I am not finished. Okay, give me one. But we're going to start in the moment in which I told you that I would stop, so that we can compare, so that we can share, so that we can improve, and so that I can check CCQ whether you understand actually what a thesis statement should be like. The third type, or the third type of information that we need in an ICQ is the conditions. What are the conditions of the task that they're developing? Are we going to work in couples? If I work in couples, can I speak English? Of course not. If they do so, what are going to be the consequences, etc., etc. And if you have provided conditions and consequences, then by all means do abide by your own rules. And about material, okay, also conditions that they need to hand you the work by the end of the lesson. It's incomplete, it doesn't matter, I'm going to check. Because if they are used to just finishing the work at home, they will never finish in the house. They don't need to have it. So yes, ICQs are about also forming habits, habits of the expectations that you have in the classroom, realistic expectations, of course, and about materials needed. So what do I need for my essay and what do I not need for my essay? If I'm making a point, and I am making a point in my group, that mistakes are important because they make us realize the trends and tendencies that we have when we write, the typical mistakes that they tend to be repetitive. I want them not to erase and not to cover with liquid paper the mistakes. I want them to be aware of their mistakes so that in the next iteration of that essay, they will try to pay attention to those particular things. So those are the 4 types of ICQs that we have. Now, what makes good ICQs? And in this case, I can say that it's a cousin of the other one. No, yes, no question. Do you understand the instruction? Of course. And then somebody asks, what do we have to do? So no. If my instruction has 3 steps or 4 parts, then I'm going to say the instructions, I'm going to write keywords on the board, or I'm going to show them like here in a dotted point or a bullet point list so that they are aware of the entire thing throughout the task development. And I'm going to make Juancho and Gomez and everyone or 4 students tell me, okay, what do we have to do number 1? What do we have to do number 2? What do we have to do number 3? And then throughout this, you make sure that everyone is kind of on target. Again, do not use this as punishment or as a public pointing fingers for students that become distracted. It's tempting. It's petty. It's really tempting because, of course, you want to make this kid realize that we know that he's not paying attention, but it's really, really important that he focuses on what to do rather than what he won't remember. So sure, tell him before, I'm going to give instructions, Juancho, I'm going to ask you, so pay attention. Number 1, tal cosa, number 2, tal cosa, number 3, tal cosa, number 4, tal cosa. Okay, we're going to start. Gomez, tell me number 1. Ta-da-da. Juancho, tell me number 2. Ta-da-da. But he's ready because you made him aware that you are going to ask him the instructions because he's the typical student that always asks, what do we have to do, teacher? So there is that. And how much? Well, if your task has a single set of instructions, it's just time. But every single lesson, if you're expecting them to do something every single lesson, then every single lesson should have at least 1 iteration of ICQ. If you run by and around your text, your task, and they are starting to ask questions about the worksheet, for example, because it could be a worksheet, then we must revise because ICQ also happens in the form of the formats that you use to teach them or to review quizzes or to develop further developments in whatever concept that you're working in. And maybe the instruction in the text is not that clear. So you need to, well, at this point, I'm going to revise every single document that you publish and that you publish not, but in this case, that you photocopy so that that is clear. If I find something confusing, I'm either going to tweak it or I'm going to ask because maybe I don't know what you aim at. So at which moments you will gauge the situation of the classroom and then you will decide this is a moment in which I have to do, okay, at this point we did the first 2 parts, the clear steps and the time for the task. Now we're going to do the second 2. Juancho, can you help me remember? What about the conditions? Their condition and this and that. And Gomez, can you remind me? Okay, try to keep it varied. I'm just using 2 names because that's what I can recall right now, okay? But that's the principle of it. Again, you involve the students in reminding each other what the instructions are. And yes, in the very beginning, I would go for putting the things back in the board so that it's clear for them and visible for them. It's like a checklist, what they have to go through, right? And that works really, really well. Now I'm going to go with the examples of ICQ that we have here. And here you have 4 different types. We will develop the exercise in 3 steps, A, B, and C. And then you say, I'm asking some of you to help me remember each, the example that I pointed out of Juancho and Gomez and whatever. The second one, you will need colors in this task. Sometimes we want them to use colors, highlighters. In high school, it's very difficult to have them, for example, bring the highlighters. And sometimes when we do text analysis, we need highlighters. So better to tell them beforehand, or probably the lesson before, that they need highlighters for the particular lesson, so they can attack their moms for their beautiful highlighters she has and then return them home the next day. So you will need colors in this task, 5 colors for the following elements, A, B, C, D, and E. So it's not just the colors and the surprise. They know what they're going to do with those colors. Why don't you help me writing them on the board? So maybe you can, okay, for advanced groups, okay? You are going to say A, B, and C, and you are going to ask Juancho to help you copy the instructions on the board through keywords, or have them projected, as I pointed out before. And then this other one, this task will take 15 minutes. When minute 8 starts, I will be asking each one of you about the first question, and you will share your answers orally. So by the time that they see that the clock ticked, because some of you teachers, I saw in one of the lessons that you projected the timer there on the board, that is a good strategy to keep them on task, focused. So they know that at that point, you will go ahead and ask each one of the students what their sentences are, what their examples are, and you are going to be able to see which kid is on target, which kid has finished a long time ago, and which kid needs more support. Okay. Now we're following with what we pointed out in the very beginning of the presentation, those examples that do not work, which I call examples of pointless ICQs and CCQs. Remember this video we saw about the megacities? How would you make this question into a good CCQ or ICQ? Is it clear what we have to do? Of course, they're going to say yes or no. Maybe they don't doubt about everything but a tiny part. And then you have to be more specific in that ICQ question. Can you recall any vertebrate animal? I'm sorry for that mistake. Can you recall any vertebrate animal? How can we change this question into a good CCQ? They need specificity. So this is just the set of examples, and I'm sorry again for that mistake that is soaring my eye, so that you try on your own to prepare better your CCQs and ICQs. Now, in my experience as a teacher, because of my verbosity, I needed to minimize my instructions, and I learned that a 3-step instruction is the best way to go. Actually, whenever my husband tells me, yeah, can we do this and that? The third one I usually forget. So he knows that he's going to tell me 2 things and then the next one, because Alzheimer attacks and I forget everything. Students are the same. It's a problem of attention. Simple as that. But using mnemonics and learning to just keep it simple, using keywords in the instructions that you're going to project on the board or that you're going to write, try to keep it simple, because writing the entire long sentence for the instructions make things very complicated to really, really understand. So a keyword would be thesis statement number 1, question. Thesis statement number 2, I don't know, percentage of population. A thesis statement number 3, critical opinion about something. Okay, so very simple. Or number 1, write thesis statement. Number 2, change a thesis statement with a peer. Number 3, review the peers, the quality of the peers' thesis statement. Number 4, share in class what you have learned about what makes a good thesis statement. 4 steps. But again, simple enough, short, and to the point. And even with the possibilities of showing, especially in the case of the little ones, examples of how the thing is done well and properly on the board, or with the projection of the slide, or with flashcards, or whatever helps you make it visually easy to spot, so that it helps them progressively work on their own attention skills. I hope that this pill, which is no longer a pill, Jesus Christ, I'm sorry, helps you do these things better. Thank you for your attention.